And welcome to another session of Q&A with Qlik. Today's topic is Qlik Replicate Best Practices. So if you are new to Qlik or you want to learn more about Qlik Replicate Best Practices for you and your company, this is the webinar for you. Troy could not be here today. He's on a well-deserved vacation, and we hope that he is having fun. My name is Emmanuel Herndon. I'm a digital customer success specialist. And one of my focus is to do webinars like these, bringing some value to customers through their journey.
My name is Kelly Hobson. I'm a support engineer for Qlik Replicate and some of our QDI tools, in addition to supporting Qlik AutoML, which is one of Qlik's newer products.
Steve?
Yeah, my name is Steve Nguyen. Pretty much, I am a principal support engineer over Qlik here. I've been with the company for over 15 years. So old products, new products, they usually come to me for assistance in isolation of what is broken. Dana?
Hi, I'm Dana Baldwin. I'm again a customer support engineer with Qlik. I've been here about 7.5 years.
Good morning, afternoon, folks. This is Bill Steinagel, principal engineer. I've been at Qlik going on 5 years. A lot of sport background, 29 plus years. So happy to have you here. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So we'll get started. What should be checked prior to upgrading Qlik Replicate?
Thanks. So this is a good general question, as upgrades are certainly a part of the process as you have with your Qlik Replicate setup, whether that's just going to a newer version or if you need to apply a fix for an issue you're experiencing. But what should be done prior to doing the upgrade is to first review the user guide, the instructions to understand the process for applying an upgrade. In addition to that, we ask you review the release notes. If you're coming from a version that's a few releases behind, those release notes will have the information on those upgrade steps or the upgrade path. And then also, a good best practice just in general is to make sure that you have a test environment so that you can potentially test and understand the steps in a lower non-production environment, so that then when you do it on production, you're ready and you really feel like you're confident with the steps you're performing.
Additional notes is that when you're upgrading your environment, make sure that a supported OS is the correct version that you're going to. Where some of the new products, like give example Replicate 2023, we only supported OS give example Red Hat Enterprise 8 and above. So some customer tried to upgrade and they run into many issues. So just Kelly was advised, make sure you check your user guide, especially in the OS support level. Okay.
Yeah. Also, I would add that sometimes the versions of the sources and targets that we support with each new version can be different as well. So that's always a good thing to check in the release notes too. Okay,
thank you. We did have a question that came in, but it came in through the chat instead of the Q&A panel. It says, could you discuss setting up Replicate for cases where the destination schema is different from the source? For example, we want to record a transaction from deleting records and keep the deleted records as a reference. Can anyone help with that question?
Yeah, excuse me. I posted an example. It's basically a transformation using the ARH operation. I could share the link with the 2023.5 version with the different headers that you could use. And the example shared in the chat is basically you can add that to a target column and add your case statement and the source schema to be added to the new column with the transformation. And the transformation is just an example. These are insert statements, update statements on the given column. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. There's a question that came into the Q&A, and it says, I saw a video of adopting GenAI in Qlik, and it's very interesting. Is there an estimated release date for the GenAI feature? I don't know if this is technically a question to be asked here, but let's see if anybody have an answer.
I can give my best on that one. So the generative AI, some of the tools are already released. So for example, AutoML is already available, and it's a part of the Gen AI kind of ecosystem. And then in addition, some of the advanced analytics connectors and Qlik Sense are available. And then I would say the other part of it was some of the alerting and reporting that's done. So I think there's not a release date that's like here, it's here, or that there's a date in the future. I think that they're just going to iteratively keep adding to the Qlik Cloud some of the features that are a part of that AI ecosystem.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Are there any plans to support older versions of SQL servers, such as 2008 as an endpoint?
I think I can take that right there. The reason that we stopped supporting SQL Server 2008 is that Microsoft's actually end of life of SQL Server 2008 back in 2019. So since Microsoft would not support it anymore, we are limited to what we can do. So that's the reason we end support of SQL Server 2008 as well too.
All right. Thank you, Steve, for that. There is a question that just came in. Is it possible to replicate a open edge database?
I could answer that question. If it's not in the support documentation as a supported endpoint or endpoint, the one that can be used via an ODBC connection, that would be a added expense to your current subscription with the tool. Obviously, anything ODBC related would be professional service engagement with the QDI Qlik team. And just a side note, that that's in general for some of these unsupported endpoints, source of your target. The recommendation is to use ODBC. We do have ODBC and ODBC CDC, and that's going through our professional services team. It's kind of out of scope with support.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Sure.
Next question. For a scheduled full load, how can we run a preload and post-load script to drop a recreated table index?
Okay. Dana, or actually I can take that. Pretty much is that within the current replicate scheduler, there is no preload or postload scripting involved. But however, if you use and give example QEM API, what you can do is you can actually do a script to call a preload and a postload script within a API call to reload your full load. So pretty much it's possible to do a preload or postload using the script and calling the API to do a full reload of your task. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for that. All right, next question. Where do I find the settings to increase and decrease how long the redo archives file is set?
Okay, I'll take that. I'm assuming that the redo, give example, or SQL Server, Oracle, those archive login information kept are really not in Replicate. Those are within the database administrator themselves. So database admin can set the retention period for a redo log itself in terms of how long the redo archive log are kept on the database server. It's not portion of Replicate. Replicate just read the information.
All right, thank you. Next question. Hi now, it says, our Qlik Replicate HDSP is running on port 8443, but we would still like to run on port 3552. Can you kindly suggest how we can do the same?
Okay, I can take that. Pretty much is that most of the UI by standard default for replicate themselves in the Windows environment run on port 80 and 443. Now, the port 3552 are mostly Unix replicate server running on port 3552. So if you run in, I'm assuming that you're running 3552 because it's a Linux environment right there. And that's why you're seeing the port 3552. Another thing that you could really run on Windows environment 3552, if you actually set in just the admin credential, and when you're doing that, you don't have user permission control over who can log into your web UI. So it's not beneficial to run 3552. It's better to run on Windows port 443 or port 80 so that you can limit the number of users that log into the web UI. Okay, when you're using port 3552, there's only one user, which is admin.
Okay. They followed up and said that their environment is Linux.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Linux environment only run on port 3552. So most likely is that they have a Windows version connecting to their Linux server. That's why they see in the port 80 or port 443. So yeah, they still can use port 3552. If they having an issue, they can open a support case on that. Okay. Okay.
Thank you for that. These are some great questions. Keep them coming, and we will get to them. The next question is it's a little lengthy, but it says, "Hello, our production replicate server is configured on Windows Server with about 130 tasks running. One of the Qlik documents suggested having only 100 tasks per each replicate machine. We are asking to configure replicate on another server and move a couple of tasks to this new server. Do you suggest having two standalone servers or having a load balancer between these two replicating servers? Thanks."
So I can talk to that one. Basically, the limitation has to do with the way the operating system manages the heap size. And generally what we find is it's about 100 tasks that can run at the same time on a single replicate server. It might be a little bit fewer tasks or a few more tasks in your individual situation, but you would want another standalone server for the second part of your question, because a load balancer would assume that you've got a separate web service that runs from the application itself, but it's all integrated. It uses the same data folder and definition for the tasks. So there's no way to have like two servers running the application against one single data folder at the same time. Now you can configure that in a failover configuration, but again, only one server is going to be active at a time in that case, and you would still be limited to about 100 tasks running at the same time.
Correct, Dana. Dana, pretty much is adding to Dana is that Windows HIPS is actually a Windows non-interactive sessions where replicate open when the task is running, it's considered a non-interactive session. So those Windows HIP size can be increased, but that's depend on how your server is set up. So it's best to just keep it under the 100 limit. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for that. There was a question that came into the chat, was misplaced, but it says, "What's the recommended share drive for high availability? For high availability in AWS?"
I can take that question. So in AWS, I'm assuming that it's S3 storage, and they have a file system set up or file share that they want to point to. As long as replicate can get to the drive, and it would probably be more beneficial to use like an EC2 type instance of replicate hosted in the same cloud provider for AWS as far as performance. So as long as replicate can get to the drive and the data directory, replicate shouldn't have an issue. But again, for performance, it might be might want to consider adding the replicate server in the same EC2 environment and the AWS cloud environment. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I wanted to go back to the previous question that Steve was talking about when we was dealing with we call it reports.
Yep.
They followed up and said your team are suggested bringing up Qlik in port 3552 to disable legacy protocol like SSL 2.0, TLS 1.0, and TLS 1.1 allow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I didn't mean to cut you off, Emmanuel.
No,
So
you're fine, you're fine.
that's basically the security cipher calls at the OS level. Replicate uses the TLS 1.2 and onwards as far as the SSL calls from the operating system. If there's a change at that level, that would be OS level, not replicate. So there's some Linux environments. There's a configuration file, OpenSSL.config in your SC Linux directory that they could work with their Linux admin to disable that. I could share a article. It's not it's kind of related, but it gives you the information about the updating of the OpenSSL config file on Linux.
That would be great. I'll
Sure.
make sure that everyone gets it.
Sure.
Thank you for that.
No problem.
So next question is a little lengthy, but it says we are experiencing an issue with a series of SAP extractors to Qlik Replicate. The problem arises when we attempt to extract data using Qlik Replicate. It returns empty rows despite being able to visualize the data through the RSA3 query in SAP. Our suspicion is that the problem lies within the immediate tables created by Replicate before data extraction, as we observe that the tables remain empty. Using the same tests, other extractors work. Is there a way to restart metadata extractors for Qlik Replicate?
I can take that question, especially with SAP Extractor. There's certain limitations as far as replicate and the extractor, depending on the environment and how the table's defined in SAP. I would suggest just looking over the, I'll post it in the chat, the limitations currently with the extractor as far as stopping, starting, resuming, starting from timestamp. There's a few limitations that you have to look out for, specific to the SAP extractor. I would look over the limitations that I shared in the link. And if you have more questions, I would definitely have a support case open.
Okay.
Because just a side note, with the extractor, there's certain steps in SAP that customers work with their SAP admin to get the extractor set up and work. And I do see the RSA3 T code in SAP that you're actually seeing the data. And there's just between the data being shown in SAP and the limitations, I would just double check that as well. And if you're still not satisfied with the information, just share a case and we could definitely proceed with you.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
I have put that link into the chat for everyone to see.
Yes, and just a side note, as far as the links I'm sharing, these are the latest 2023.5 version. If you do click on the link, there is an option to change the release to the certain version that you're running. And notice you only see November 2021. As we go and move on to new versions, those are removed from the documentation once they're out of service. So just a side note to be aware of.
I just wanted to show quickly the link that Bill provided. All right. Next question is there a way to schedule a turn off Qlik CDC for a few hours on Sunday night to support scheduled downtime of the source?
Kelly?
I can take this one, Bill. So if you go under the server tab and the scheduler, you can go to the scheduled jobs and have a new scheduled job of type stop task. So you would stop your CDC task, and then you can have another task a couple hours later that would do the start or the resume the task. So then it would just pick up where it left off, but it would have that period of downtime.
Yep. And latency when you started.
Yeah, late. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. Next question. Continuing from my previous question on load balancing and standalone servers, does Replicate support clustering? If yes, how does that work?
I can take that. Pretty much is that Replicate support either Windows clustering or Linux clustering. Pretty much is that, give example, for Windows clustering, we support Windows clustering where Replicate is installed on both instances, and the data folder is on a shared storage. So give example, we support only active passive clustering. We don't support active clustering. So that means that one server is up and running, and if Windows cluster service detect some issue with one node, it will go ahead and automatically transfer to another node. So that means that all the tasks gracefully stop. Windows transfer is to another node, bring up their services, and at that point, all the tasks will resume from another node. And since that the data folder is shared on a shared network drive, all that information is considered the continuation of the task themselves. Okay.
Okay, thank you. The next question that we have is following up from the previous question on recommendation, shared drives for high availability. It says any recommended AWS service for shared storage.
I could just try to give some information on it. As far as the AWS and the storage, that's the actual physical storage device that they define in AWS that's going to hold the data for replication on the source and or your target. I guess that would be a EC2 VM or something in the cloud from the Replicate server running on Windows.
Thank you for that.
Sure. We could take that offline if needed as well.
Okay. So the next question that we have is, do we have below options for CDC Replicate? If not, when can we expect in which version? They have capture only updates, inserts and deletes, capture only deletes, not inserts and updates, and capture only inserts, not deletes and updates. Anyone
Sure,
have?
Yeah, sorry, Emmanuel. Yeah, that goes back to the question posted earlier. That would be the AR_H_ operation indicator, a delete, insert, and update, and then they could just use a transformation on that column that they want to capture or not capture the specific operation.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Next question. You are a partner for Postgres Data Direct. Why don't you have a connector for OpenEdge? Anyone have an answer to that question?
I believe this is ordered up to product management right now, Emmanuel, is that depend on our products management team, where they can see this particular endpoint is meet customer requirement. So really is up to product management. So the best way to have an open edge endpoint is that you might have to submit a feature request ideation into the Qlik form, and hopefully that many people request enough, we will have a open edge endpoint.
Moving on to the next question. It says, can Qlik Replicate handle 2 billion records for Oracle Cloud storage to Snowflake target? Is there better to combine multiple 2 billion records into one task or split table into multiple tasks? Are there any performance parameters that we should add? This is a Linux environment. Anyone have any ideas?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, so there's not Replicate doesn't really have any limitations as far as going from Oracle to Snowflake. Be a good consideration for parallel load. If you need to load the data from your Oracle environment to your target, it may take a few days, but you have to understand that Replicate sits on top of the ODBC layer that does all the communication between your source and your target, and the location of your Replicate server to your Snowflake target as well. The other thing to note about Snowflake is the warehouse size that you're writing to. Depending on queuing, there's some different techniques that working with your Snowflake admin that could help better tune the target environment coming from the source. But just remember the Replicate server, depending on the location, as far as Oracle, reading from Oracle, and then writing to your Snowflake target, that takes in consideration as well, as far as the performance and the parameters to use. There is you could do multiple tables, but if this table is specific to one table, parallel load would be the best option. And then the other thing to look at Snowflake is the warehouse size. I think the warehouse size is more appropriate than the amount of clusters associated with that warehouse.
Correct, Bill.
And just a side note, any performance related, when working with support via a support case or the community, it's, support can take a look, give recommendations, but anything that goes more, that gets more involved, we always recommend professional services because it's performance tuning as far as your source and target goes.
Another question, a little lengthy. We are using batch mode for CDC from Postgres to Snowflake, and the source is an Aurora Postgres Global. If we had the need to fail over from Aurora cluster to our secondary DR site, is it possible to resume the task rather than full load the task? After discussing with professional service, it seems the recommendation to not lose data is full load after failover, but there is a very limited in our DR testing validation as the full load can take many days to complete.
I can answer that right there, Emil. I believe is that since Postgres fell over in the DR environment on Aurora, it doesn't keep the transaction log in terms of what is Postgres is reading. Postgres is reading. Somebody, Dana or Kelly, help me out a little bit. In terms of it's not transaction log. What is Postgres reading?
It uses a wall, right?
The
wall
socket.
The wall file. So pretty much is that on the CDC, when the DR of the Postgres fell over, that wall got changed right there in the failover of the cluster on Azure, I believe. Well, if that's the case, then Replicate doesn't know where the wall was resumed from, and that's why professional service recommend a full load. If the wall is able to continue from one cluster to another, then Replicate is able to continue moving forward from there on. Okay.
Yeah, and just to add to that, with Postgres, there's no starting from timestamp. So
Correct.
if back to Steve's point, if the wall ID is not moved to the other cluster from the failover, if you can't resume the task, that's why that would be most likely why professional service recommend the full load to ensure no data loss.
Correct.
All right, thank you for that. We have another question, but before we get to it, if there is any more last minute questions that anyone have, please again put them in the Q&A panel, and we'll get to them. The next question we have is for DDL changes. How do we avoid doing a full reload of the table? We are using Microsoft SQL server. Our process is when a DDL change is ready to be released, we have to flip the CDC on and off to get the metadata table to match in order to get Qlik to unsuspend the table. However, we are not sure if we will miss data during the CDC flip. Reloading large tables can be very cumbersome and inconvenient to our end users. Any feedback you can provide for other customers or I guess for them, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I believe we can handle the DDL here in terms of MSCDC. I believe they turn it off and turn it on. It could be that the version of the SQL Server is not up to like 2018, 2019. I can double check in terms of DDL handling in the user guide real fast. So just bear with me. But I have. Go ahead, Bill.
I shared for you, Steve, and
Okay,
that goes back to the MSCDC. That is one of the limitations as far as the DDL change.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Is I
Yep.
believe there's a limitation right there.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well-
is the endpoint that you're using, which is the MSCDC, that's why it's a limitation. If you're using the normal MySQL replication, then we handle the DDL without any issue. So it's just so you definitely have to consider looking at the user guide under the limitation and going forward. Okay.
Yeah, I shared the link for on-prem SQL Server as well.
Thank you, Bill.
Sure.
Okay, I have shared that with everyone. Next question, and it might be our next to last question. Again, if you have any more questions, please put it into the Q&A panel. Is there a possibility to improve the loading performance for SAP to
The SaaS Cloud?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The same
No.
Qlik View took 40% to 45% less time. Whew.
I'll make an attempt for that question. As far as the cloud and SAP, do we understand or know the performance? Is it on the SAP side or is it on the SaaS Cloud side? With SAP, you have obviously you have different source endpoints, SAP application, SAP DB. So if it's SAP application, it goes through RFC calls, which is a load on the SAP source system environment. If it's the database, all the physical and data loading is at the database level. That goes into consideration along with the location of the cloud server. But it depends on the type of connections. Remember, Replicate uses the ODBC connections. As far as SAP goes, it uses our internal endpoint server connections to do the communication. Without having more details and information, I can't confirm as a performance why one would be faster than the other. That would be a support case and would most likely turn into a professional service engagement as far as performance goes.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Sure.
How often should we upgrade Qlik Replicate as a service pack release appeared to be frequent?
Good
So I
question. Go ahead, Dana.
Good.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Basically, service packs come out as we're working support cases and we run into issues that need to be fixed. So generally speaking, unless you're impacted by that particular issue, you don't need a service pack. Occasionally, a service pack will include new features or enhancements. To obtain those, you would need to open a support case and we could provide you with a download link. Also, be aware that about every 3 months, we will roll up service packs into what we call a service release. And those will be made available on the regular downloads page that's publicly available. And mainly it's just to get fixes available to users that have accumulated. And also if there's been any significant changes, then a service release will come out.
Sounds good, Dana. Another thing I want to add is that you can always open a support case and ask, hey, what is the latest service pack? You don't have to download it, but you can always click on it and get the release note of that service pack. If your endpoint gives them SQL Server, Oracle, Snowflake, any of those notes, then hey, it's best to just go ahead and update it so that your environment doesn't affect or get our latest in terms of what is covered in that service pack. That's the, you don't have to upgrade. You just can always download the release note and just read up on it.
And I just wanted to add, piggyback with Steve, as far as SAP goes, we do recommend customers, if you're at a current version, especially the supported versions 2022.11 and 2023.5, is to be on the latest service release for that version to pick up all the specific SAP changes for that version.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
We have one last question in the Q&A panel, and is there a version of Qlik that replicates non-cluster index over to the target DB? And the second question, is there any documentation of all the internal parameters somewhere we can reference?
Okay, well, I'm not sure about the first question right there, but in terms of internal parameter are there for support use, is really not for open to the world. So yes, I can, we could open it up to the world. It's just that now we're going to create more issues. It's just like, think of where you're trying to cook a recipe and you put all the ingredients into your cooking. It wouldn't be a good tasting meal. So that's the same reason we didn't open up to everybody. Okay. So it's only base case needed to have a particular internal parameter to use on a certain situation.
All right, thank you, Steve. That was a good analogy. I like that.
Yeah, it's true. That's how I can put it.
And there's one last question that slid in real quick, and we just want to cover it. Can we give task level permissions to replicate instances to different security groups? Like one set of users part of one AD group can only see the tasks that are assigned to them. If so, is there an API available to do the same?
Okay. But that can be accomplished from QEM itself. It's not within Replicate. Replicate is the actual replication engine. QEM is the monitor application where a QEM monitor the server and can assign to an AD group or an AD user on a particular endpoint or a particular case only. So yes, it could be possible from QEM.
All right, thank you. I think there's a follow-up. Qlik Replicate only replicates primary keys, but doesn't copy over non-cluster index. Is there a version of a way for Qlik to copy and apply non-cluster indexes?
Non-cluster. What is that endpoint right there, Bill? Is it a limitation somewhere, Bill?
Yeah, it depends on the source. We would need to know the source and target endpoint to further give you a complete answer on that follow-up.
Yeah, I believe it could be a limitation on that particular endpoint right there.
Right. Yeah. So just as an example, real quick, with Snowflake doesn't have the concept of primary keys. The primary key and the constraint, that's handled by Replicate. That's what has the information. So a more follow-up and thorough answer can be provided depending on your source and target. I would check the community. If it's not found there, definitely share a support case and we'd be happy to complete the answer.
I think they updated and said SQL and MySQL.
Yes, I would have to take that offline to confirm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So just as a side note to that last question, check the community and then share a support case if it's not there, and we'll get back to you. Okay.
All right. Session would like to thank the panelists as well as the audience for your questions. Before we go.
Yes, and Emmanuel, just one quick follow-up on that last question from David. Just make sure we get that back and we get that communicated out to him. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay. We say have a great day.